This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person, one country, or one decision. This is about something quieter, something heavier, something that almost never moves fast until it does. For decades, the global system rested on a simple assumption: that money parked in the safest place would still be there tomorrow. That the plumbing underneath the world economy was boring, predictable, neutral. That assumption is no longer safe. Right now, far from cameras and speeches, something foundational is being unwound. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deliberately. It does not look like panic. It looks like preparation, and here is the uncomfortable part. By the time this kind of shift becomes obvious to everyone, it is already too late to reverse. You don't see it in prices first. You see it in exits. If you stay with me, I want to show you where to look and why what's moving there matters more than anything on the surface. Because once this starts, it doesn't stop halfway. And the next step is where the illusion finally breaks. This is the part where most people get misled. Because when systems fail, we are trained to look for villains. A leader, a decision, a confrontation we can point to, but that is not what controls this system anymore. What actually governs the world right now is not ideology, not elections, not even military power. It is custody. Who holds whose assets, under which jurisdiction, with which legal switch that can be flipped in a single night. For decades, this arrangement worked because no one believed it would be used as a weapon. Money was money. Reserves were reserves. Debt was boring. That era quietly ended. The system is now controlled by the ability to immobilize value without touching a tank or firing a missile, to turn safety into leverage, to transform risk-free into conditional. And once that happens, rational behavior changes. Not suddenly. Strategically, the most important actors stop optimizing for return. They start optimizing for survivability. And that shift away from profit toward escape is the signal most people miss. Because when the system stops being economic, every number starts lying. And the next move is where that lie becomes visible. For a long time, this change didn't look like a change at all. It blended in. It was slow, administrative, easy to normalize. Before, reserves were treated like savings. They earned interest. They sat quietly. They signaled trust. Now, reserves are treated like exposure. Before, the question was, what pays the most over time? Now the question is, what can be taken from us if everything breaks? That is the silent shift. It didn't arrive with an announcement. It arrived with footnotes, with compliance language, with phrases like exceptional circumstances and temporary measures. And slowly, the meaning of ownership changed. Holding something no longer meant controlling it. It meant depending on permission. Most people didn't notice because nothing seemed wrong. Markets still opened, trade still cleared, balances still showed up on screens. But underneath, the logic flipped. The safest assets became the most vulnerable, not because of price, because of jurisdiction. And once that realization settles in at the top of the system, behavior changes everywhere else. Quietly, irreversibly. That's when normalization becomes dangerous. Because the most destabilizing shifts never announce themselves as crises. They wait, and then they surface as one. And that brings us to the first visible shock. The data arrives the way it always does. Dry, dense, technically public. Almost designed not to be read. Buried inside a routine release is a number that does not behave the way it's supposed to. A number that doesn't panic, doesn't spike. It simply keeps falling. Not a little, not temporarily, persistently. What makes it alarming isn't the size alone. It's the timing. This movement happens during a period when selling makes no sense. When prices are down, when losses are locked in, when any rational holder would wait. And yet, the selling accelerates. That is the tell. Because in finance, losses are tolerated only under two conditions: when you are forced, or when you believe holding on is far more dangerous than letting go. There is no visible liquidity emergency here, no scramble for cash, no fire sale narrative that fits, which leaves only one explanation that survives contact with the facts. This is not risk management. It is risk avoidance. And once you see that, the number stops being a statistic. It becomes a message, a quiet one, but unmistakable. And the question it raises is the one the system is trying hardest not to answer. What do they know that makes this exit worth the loss? This is where the mechanics matter, because what looks like a sell-off is actually a transfer of risk. When a large holder exits quietly, the system absorbs it. Prices wobble, headlines shrug, nothing breaks. But when the exit is persistent, someone else has to step in. Every bond sold must be bought. Every risk shed must be carried. And here's the part that rarely gets said out loud. The buyers replacing the exit are not doing it for profit. They are doing it for stability, or more precisely, to prevent instability from spreading back to themselves. This is how the system now works. Risk doesn't disappear. It migrates from economic actors to political ones, from surplus economies to balance sheet strained allies, from voluntary buyers to reluctant absorbers. The market still clears. That's the illusion. But the motive has changed. And when motives change, markets behave differently under stress. Economic buyers walk away when returns fall. Political buyers walk away when pressure at home becomes unbearable. That difference matters more than price. Because once a market depends on buyers who cannot say no forever, stability becomes conditional, temporary, borrowed, and the system is now balanced on that condition, which means the next shock doesn't need to be large. It just needs to land in the wrong place. Now the pace changes, because once the handoff happens, events stop spacing themselves out. Selling continues. Absorption tightens. Margins thin. Small stresses start to matter. Currencies wobble. Yields twitch. Emergency meetings happen without press releases. This is not collapse. Not yet. This is strain. The kind that doesn't show up in headlines, but shows up in policy decisions that don't quite make sense on their own. Support measures, temporary facilities, quiet coordination, each one manageable, each one defensible. But together, they tell a different story. The system is no longer responding to growth. It is responding to pressure. And pressure changes behavior. Buyers become hesitant. Sellers become impatient. Everyone starts watching everyone else. Because the real risk now isn't price volatility. It's coordination failure. The moment one major participant stops playing their role, the burden shifts violently to whoever is left. And that kind of shift doesn't unwind gradually. It snaps. This is why calm markets at this stage are misleading. They don't signal safety. They signal intervention. And interventions work right up until they don't. The next break won't come from a dramatic announcement. It will come from someone quietly deciding they can't carry this anymore. And that's when the system discovers how thin the floor really is. Here is where this stops being abstract. Because systems don't fail in spreadsheets. They fail in lives. When this pressure moves through the system, it doesn't land on markets. It lands on you. It shows up as borrowing that never gets cheaper, as mortgages that don't come back down, as governments that suddenly discover limits they insist don't exist. It shows up as trade-offs. Cut here, delay there. Defer maintenance. Postpone promises. None of it dramatic on its own. All of it cumulative. And the most destabilizing part is this. You are asked to absorb it without being told why. To accept that this is just how things are now. That stability costs more. That safety has conditions. You are told to be patient, to trust the system, to believe the experts still have room to maneuver, but the system is no longer optimizing for you. It is optimizing for continuity, and those are not the same thing. If you feel like the ground rules changed without your consent, you're not imagining it. That's what happens when a system shifts from economic logic to strategic survival. This is the point where attention matters, because disengagement is what allows quiet transfers of risk to continue unnoticed. Stay with me, because what happens next doesn't stay contained. It spreads. This is no longer confined to one country or one balance sheet, because once risk starts moving politically, it doesn't respect borders. The same pressure that forces absorption in one place creates scarcity somewhere else. Capital pulled into stabilization is capital not spent on growth. On energy, on infrastructure, on resilience, that trade-off ripples outward. Currencies begin to feel it first, then trade relationships, then policy alignment. Alliances that were built for security start carrying financial weight they were never designed to hold, and that changes how they behave. Support becomes conditional. Coordination becomes strained. Domestic politics start pushing back against external obligations. This is how global systems fragment, not with a rupture, with fatigue. Each participant tells itself it can hold on a little longer, that someone else will blink first. That stability is still cheaper than disorder, but every added layer of pressure narrows the margin for error. And the most dangerous moment isn't when everyone panics. It's when everyone assumes everyone else will keep absorbing the cost, because that assumption only has to fail once. And when it does, the spillover doesn't ask permission. It moves through markets, currencies, and governments at the same time. What looked contained suddenly isn't. And the future stops being a projection. It becomes a set of paths, none of them comfortable. From here, the system doesn't have one outcome. It has three. The first is adjustment, managed, orderly, painful, but contained. In this path, new buyers emerge at higher prices. Yields rise just enough. Spending tightens just enough. Everyone accepts a lower standard of comfort in exchange for continuity. Nothing breaks. Nothing heals. The system limps forward, thinner, slower, more fragile than before. The second path is erosion. This one is quieter. More deceptive interventions multiply. Temporary measures become permanent. Support replaces confidence. The market still functions, but only because it is constantly held together. Trust drains away in increments. Participation narrows. Every shock leaves more residue. Nothing collapses. But nothing works the way it used to either. And then there is the third path, rupture. Not from excess drama, from exhaustion. One participant steps back. One balance sheet says no. One currency snaps under the strain. And suddenly the system discovers that what it thought was diversification was actually concentration. What it thought was resilience was actually repetition. No one chooses this path on purpose. But systems enter it when options run out. Which path becomes real depends on something most people aren't watching closely enough yet. Capacity, who still has it, and who doesn't. And that brings us to the part we usually avoid. If you're waiting for a clear signal that this is over, you won't get one. Systems like this don't end with announcements. They end with normalization. What you are watching is not a collapse. It is a conversion. From a world where safety was assumed to a world where safety is negotiated. From a system that ran on confidence to one that runs on pressure. And the danger isn't that something breaks tomorrow. The danger is that nothing breaks. And everyone quietly adapts to a thinner, harsher version of stability. That is how thresholds move. That is how risk gets renamed as reality. The numbers will keep updating. Reports will keep coming out. Officials will keep saying the system is resilient. And technically, they won't be lying. But resilience that depends on constant absorption is not strength. It is delay. So the question is no longer whether this matters. It's whether you are paying attention while it's still slow. Because once the system stops moving quietly, it doesn't ask who's ready. If you want to understand what happens next, don't watch the headlines. Watch the exits. Watch who stops absorbing. That's where the next break announces itself, without ever saying its name. If you're still here, stay here, because the next layer of this story isn't louder. It's closer,